Is that Ridge?
Good morning and welcome to Deep Dives with New Perspectives. I'm Michael Bartlett with Merrylin LeBlanc. If you like what we're doing here, please hit like, please hit subscribe, please share with your friends. Thank you for your comments, and thank you most of all for listening to us. It's nice when we know that people are enjoying hearing what we're talking about, even though we're just enjoying it here ourselves. Good morning, Merrylin. How are you?
Good morning, Michael. I am fine. I'm enjoying a little cooler weather, and I talking about weather makes me think a little bit of astrology. I have encountered an astrologer here or there who has tried to do astrology on the weather.
And how's that go?
Not very far.
I mean,
It's kind of,
I was just going to say, it makes me think, I mean, there are sometimes there are these larger indicators, like, I know, like, I think with the tsunami thing, there was some kind of a thing with Neptune, but, with those outer larger planets, they move so slowly. And so how do you actually, it's like, that is a possibility within this long period of time. So how do you pinpoint it into this moment, right? Because that's really what it's about.
well, what's interesting is if you look at weathermen, and I recently I was watching local news on television and listening to the weathermen and thinking, what is it about weathermen? I mean, there's something. I can look on my phone, and know what the weather's going to be like today and for the next week, etc. But there is something interesting, especially about our local ones, in that they give us some of the science behind weather prediction way more than you get on your smartphone. And it's mercurial. It's like they're bringing all kinds of details and information about this current, that depression, this, I don't know what, I forget all the names that they have for these different things. But you think about it, that's a very mercurial process. And Mercury is one of these planets that moves very, very quickly. Mr. Mercury rising over there. Or no, you're not Mercury rising, you're Jupiter, the opposite sign, but Mercury at the midheaven, I'm sorry. but all the details, it's very Virgo, extremely Virgo.
But it's so funny. Do you realize as you say that too? Do you think of a barometer, a device that we would hang on the wall that tells us what the temperature is, what the pressure is, all that sort of stuff, and what is inside of it? Mercury. You can't use mercury anymore now because it's considered a harmful substance. They use a type that red alcohol you see now in thermometers. But for us oldies, we're very much used to seeing that silver color, which is actually mercury. Hello. Mercury, the planet, Quicksilver, all these things, where they blend together. And this mercurial thing is like, where you sit there and we're seeing these systems now, they're sitting here slowly and just like sitting in like the tornadoes and the hurricanes that are doing this thing where they usually move really quickly, but now they're like staying for days because of climate change. And, it's like Mercury going into a retrograde space, right? Or stationing, like going, oh, I think I'm going to rest here for a couple of days, which Mercury isn't really good at.
Well, I'm also thinking that if you wanted to use, and this is not something that I want to personally pursue, but if you wanted to pursue weather patterns astrologically, you would have to take into account some astrocartography, and geodetics. These are forms of astrology that talk about the energy of places, because of course that's part of the factoring in. So it could be quite a complex study. And that's the thing about Mercury, is Mercury goes anywhere and everywhere.
And it's funny because I don't know about you, when you were a kid, when I was a kid, I thought, pretty much all of us, we watched that is funny, like what you said about the weather person, because I'm thinking of like, it's very Geminian, right? It's like, it always draws in. In fact, it's the only thing that I like to watch on the local news, which it always happens like right around 18 minutes after the hour. That's how much I know, but it's also like, when we were growing up, I think you would think a whole city would be one temperature, right? But now since then we've learned about these microclimates, these little, you know, where there's just a little way that there's a certain elevation, there's a certain way the air flows through that period, that space, that makes it cooler or hotter than the other areas. And so it's very, very intriguing. And so I like that you brought in, I was thinking the same thing with astrocartography and the geodetic space, because it
Right.
really kind of helps show.
Right. And even the natural qualities, like here weather changes very quickly. We have the mountains, the desert, the canyons, the plateaus, the mesas. All of these things have an influence, and we have correlations to those things in astrology. I'm thinking Capricorn for the mountains, and stuff like that. So aside from geodetics and astrocartography, so yeah, it can be quite complex. It gives we can't dismiss, even with the smartphones, we can't dismiss those weather reporters. They have a very complex scientific work, and it takes, I think, a lot of study.
And in a way, it's really not too dissimilar to astrology, right? You know, you have the planets, you have the signs, you have the houses, you have the angles,
The
you have the
aspects.
personality, the aspects, all these, sorry, all these parts that come in. It's that same thing almost with the weather person. And again, it's Mercury. That's very, to me, Virgo. It's Gemini uses a bit of it. It brings all these different pieces, but Virgo is the one that's able to bring a sort of it's getting towards a point of synthesis, right? That is attained in Capricorn on an Earth basis. But going from the Gemini to the Virgo, going from that air to the Earth, it's really giving one a grounded, practical understanding about how things work. Like the little details that are required. I think of Mercury in Gemini. It sometimes just wants to hear itself talking, whereas Mercury in Virgo wants to know that it's providing some sort of a service or some sort of a resource.
It's so funny because what you said about Gemini, and I immediately flashed in a couple of Gemini, not necessarily Gemini sons, friends,
Right.
like Gemini rising. And I'm going like, yes.
Gemini North Node and Gemini Descendant here. So
I almost slapped one the other day, just because it was sort of like what I was saying was not of any importance and was waved aside, just so that person could talk about their personal. And I'm going like, I had to do that. Hold your tongue, or you really lash this person and probably never see them again. And I didn't want that to happen.
yeah, Scorpio Moon's got to every once in a while check itself before it wrecks itself.
Yeah, don't sting too hard. This isn't in the greater picture of things. This is not that significant. It's just your ego that got wounded a little bit.
But also I think for the fixed signs, especially like Aquarius and Scorpio, there's like this, I think there's a different level of indignancy, that can occur. It's like, oh my, and also Leo too is like, how dare they,
Yeah, we're mutable signs. Let's go, huh, what the heck? Let it go.
Right.
No big deal.
It's funny because I have as you know, my a Danish exchange sister, and it's funny when my partners have met her over the years. Her name's Pia, because she has this very nice way of, like, when I come at her with my kind of like Sagittarian puppy crazy energy, she has this really beautiful way that she just kind of like does that to me, just in just the right amount of way that just kind of like push. It's like how you I call it redirection, like with my dogs. It's like redirecting the energy. It's not anything that's confrontational or anything. She just does this thing where she just gently says, oh, okay, well, that sounds great, and moves me along in a way where she doesn't have to engage with it. And I'm just like, I tell my parents, like, you can learn from her.
Right. Well, a lot of teachers have those skills.
Yeah.
Because you're anticipating something, and you know that if this continues, it's going to be disastrous. And so you find that you you find something to divert the attention.
Or like what you say, sometimes we're on the receiving end of things. I mean, so we're kind of, just for, what we're all talking about right here is like, we're starting to delve into this area of what's going on right now, which is Mercury retrograde in Libra, right? So it's like, you know, how do we communicate in a way, how do we relate to others in a way that is both honoring and right and true, but also right and true and honoring ourselves. And so, you know, here are these like elements, you know, so here you are encountering someone who's like in a bit of a, maybe a leonine fit of self-centeredness. And, you know, you don't really want to give them any air, right? You don't want to really fan that flame because you really don't want to hear the rest of that story. So, you know, what are the tactful
Again and
ways
again
of,
and again. And you don't want to hear it repeatedly.
right? And then the other thing is what I think is nice is when you think about Mercury retrograde, it's like if you think about it when you're talking with someone and you start to step back, as we step back from someone, that creates a vacuum and that takes air away. So one of the easiest ways I find, and what is probably going to be really helpful for a lot of people during this period, I don't know, I'm just such a Saturn and Pisces. So I mean, this is a lifelong lesson for me with Chiron there. Boundaries. You know, finding ways that you allow yourself to have boundaries with other, you know, ways in which that, you know, how are you engaging in a way that's healthy and right, that is honoring the other person, and that also sees the other person, right? Was the person who you were talking to a male or a female?
Oh, back to the Mercury Gemini. Yeah, well, it's a male.
Okay, because that's, you know, to be honest, I really see that as very indicative also, right? This is something that so many women deal with and have dealt with. I mean, things are getting better, but I mean, at least we're talking about it now and some of the things are getting resolved, but you wouldn't have even been able to say that 10 or 15 years ago as well as you can now, right?
Well,
Now
that,
it's
yeah,
like, you know,
true. It's true.
I don't really, you know, thank you. I don't, you know, I don't think you're half as fascinating as you do. So
Oh, well, that's an interesting way of putting about it. Yeah, Mercury will be retrograde next week, and we will not be doing a show next week. But you know, I've been thinking about this Mercury going retrograde, and it'll be going retrograde next week.
it's
Actually,
already retrograde.
is it?
Yeah, it went
Wait,
retrograde last night or Sunday night.
what? Where am I? Yeah, right. Mercury has gone retrograde this past weekend.
What a great
And
retrograde moment you just had.
I had a retrograde moment because one of the things that I have been focusing on is when Mercury retrograde meets up with the sun, which will happen on the 9th of October. And I think that's why I flipped forward to another week. Because, you know, that's the beginning of a sun Mercury cycle. And, you know, it's like, what's the initiating energy? And as you pointed out in the talk we did at the beginning of this year, 2021, Mercury is retrograde in air signs. And which are signs that have to do with relationships and communication, connections with our not just people relationships, but our relationship to stuff, to things, to ideas, all of it,
Yeah,
any kind of relationship.
Yep.
And, you know, so I was kind of thinking about it, and, you know, in my own personal life, you know, what was it like back in February when it was Aquarius, and then in June in Gemini, and now well into October in Libra. And I'm so air. I've got something emphasizing all of those air signs. So it's sort of interesting. But I flipped from me to the United States. And I thought what was interesting back, you know, when the retrograde was in Aquarius, in the United States chart, this was around the second house area. And I'm being very broad here in this regard. And we had a new administration. The Biden administration was still in its first 100 days. And one of the major things is, you know, this whole pandemic and the economy. And consequently, you know, they put out some more notices about, you know, pumping up the economy with giving people money, etc. And I thought, how interesting. And then come June 6th, no, not necessarily the 6th, forget the dates. Just- I have to be looking at charts if I'm going to have to mention things like in detail. Uh, um, in June, in Gemini, this was in the United States, 6th to 7th house in that area.
Mhm.
And and I, even though I think the withdrawal from Afghanistan happened later in the summer, I was thinking about how the 6th house has to do with the military and mundane astrology. And then our foreign relations are the 7th house. And so to me that was a striking moment. I mean, we still we've had and we have to continue to make changes to promote a healthy economy in this country. That goes back to the Aquarius retrograde of Mercury.
Yeah, and here
And
we are
then
finally with the bills before Senate and Congress, right?
in
Where
Libra, and that's in the 10th house, our government structure. And this is kind of interesting. This is what I looked at the symbol as a retired sea captain.
hmm,
And I thought, I kind of thought about it like, okay, uh, those guys aren't retired yet, but some of the obviously we've heard from, Bush, George W, and we've heard from other past presidents, not just Republicans, Obama and whatnot, that they have been encouraging somewhat what the Biden Biden, I call him like he's Irish. No, the Biden administration is doing. So there is this kind of what is going to happen here, because Congress is at a very strange tipping point in terms of how does this country move forward. It's a you know it's it's a dangerous time.
it is. It's funny as you say that. It's like it feels to me like there's just like this petri dish with the two cells, i.e. Democrats and Republicans. And it's like all of a sudden, like the diversification of those two parties is getting so big. It's like, like when you make popcorn or like on a petri dish, like it just pops open. It's like, it's just under its own pressure. It's like, we need some more parties. We need a few more viewpoints along the spectrum. We need to have some sort of a way in which that our country is really being reflected in the electorate, sex wise, religion wise, and of course, race wise.
And we need the advice of
Elders,
mature individuals, of
elders.
people who have experienced a lot.
Yeah, and that it's funny because like when you said the Sabian symbol, retired sea captain, the first thing I think of is like I see it, I see the sea captain standing on like on a porch looking out at the sea and firmly on terra firma. That all the trials and tribulations, I mean, when one goes out to sea, if that isn't a surrender to the all that is in the great Neptunian, and really in a way very Plutonic also, it's like there are ways in which you can survive because your wits are really going to help you, but there's also ways in which the sea can just take you down and you don't have any things. So there's having that stability, having weathered many storms, right? When we think of being out to sea for any amount of time, one is going to encounter a storm. And when we think of that as far as our government, and you brought it up again with having those who have maturity, some of those who have like an understanding, having a blend of the young and the old, because the older understand that there is work that takes place over long periods of time, and then there are the youth who really want to be able to make change happen immediately. And it's like finding that counterbalance in a way, which also here, what the year started out with, and also where Jupiter and Saturn had their conjunction in December is in the sign of Aquarius. That's Saturn and Uranus. that stability and that evolution that has to happen, the new ways of finding relatable ways of using the old that still apply today, and get rid of the things that no longer serve us.
Yes, and it dawned on me too that I don't think it's best to always apply maturity to age. There are young people, children who are very mature.
Greta.
Yes, that she would be one, and as an example. And they may not have life experience yet, which contributes a lot to maturity. But we have a term in metaphysics, we often refer to such people as old souls. They bring the wisdom of many existences into this one.
And there's something about youth too that it allows us, at least this is what I've seen from more of a spiritual sense, that there's a veil that's thinner when we're younger. And as we grow older and we're getting more enmeshed in a system of society and our family and everything, that kind of, it's a brainwashing, it's a programming. It takes us away from that insight. And so when we're young, we see things like, all you have to do is go and be near like a newborn to about 6 months old that someone else has, and be near it, and just practice this little thing of just like expanding your energy and then close it, bringing it back in, and seeing what that little baby does. Believe me, they respond, they feel, they know all those energies. But as we get older, we forget that it's possible. So it's so nice. That's what youth gives us, is it sometimes gives us that way of cutting through and of having this observational nature in the oppositely exact important way that also maturity gives us that, right? There are two ways of attaining that.
Well, you're reminding me of Rudolf Steiner's work when looking at life in 7-year cycles, which is like looking at quarter cycles of Saturn, which is Saturn is about aging and becoming the Senex, the wise old man. And, so that by the age of 42, we've gone through 6-7-year cycles. And that's in an astrology, or around, give or take a few years, that's a time when we're hit with all these major aspects in our lives. Uranus opposite Uranus, Neptune square Neptune.
Right.
Sometimes Pluto square Pluto. It depends on when you were born, because it's an irregular cycle. But in modern contemporary times, we've called those midlife crises, but they're actually crises of the soul. And one class I did with a woman who's very much into Steiner's teachings, she used the shape of a U. And she said, we start at the top of one tip of the U, and it takes us 42 years to get down to the bottom. And what that is in those 42 years is gaining earthly experience. And by 42, we should know enough that we can respond to our souls and say, what is my soul here for? Have I been attending to that, or have I not been attending to that? And often many of us go through a midlife crisis at that time. I know
An adjustment period, right? And or awakening.
Right. And so then you begin the journey back up towards spirit, which could be another 42. And it's interesting because 42 and 42 is 84, which is a Uranus cycle. So there's this kind of awakening, and then in awakening, going towards that ideal, because in the mythology of Uranus, it was basically he didn't like his offspring because they were ugly. They did not match his ideals. But in the end, he got his ideal with Aphrodite. He got what he was seeking, what he wanted most, in that respect. So
that's where there's that element too of like where we think we're so in charge of creating, like here's this god Uranus, right? The sky god, and each thing that he births is not to his liking, but it's like, well, then maybe we have to adjust what it is that we like, right? Like how art changes sometimes. It brings up to mind to me when Impressionist art came into vogue, in the early 20th century, in 1900s, where individuals looked at it, classically trained painters would look at it, and artists would look at it, and they're like, that's just an underpainting. You haven't finished it. But now we look at it and we go, oh my gosh, look at the bravado, look at the strength, look at the color, look at the vibe. There's such a change in the way the energies are. It's very different.
Yeah, exactly. It was time.
We have to adjust our position. And that's where Mercury, these retrograde periods are really kind of these adjustment opportunities, right? It gives us this ability to kind of like go, oh, and like, especially now, because it's in Venus's place. And then we've got what? Venus, Sun, Mars, and Mercury are all in Libra right now.
Mhm.
It's quite a little
Yeah.
opportunity
Bringing
for,
us,
sorry?
I was gonna say, bringing us back to Mercury too, and this whole thing about where the soul is going. I mean, remember that Mercury is the uh um he's the guide back into the underworld,
The
back into
psychopomp.
the psychopomp, exactly. And and so basically, if what if we looked at Mercury retrograde periods as a period of time of our going, oh, it's sort of like that notion of when you die, you go back over your life and make the final judgment of it. Was sort of like a period to go back over some aspect of our lives, with the Mercury retrograde in Libra, and the astrology chart would tell you what area is that you're going back over.
It's funny, like I've been having this experience the last few years with the Mercury retrograde period where it's kind of interesting because, we're taught when Mercury goes retrograde that that's not the time to sign things. It's not the time to enter in agreements and everything. But there are also, these times that happen in our lives where we really don't have a choice, right? These are, there are things that we have to do. And it's interesting because as of today, I'm finding there are these things that I've been waiting and waiting and waiting for a long period of time to get resolved. One that's very, very, very significant, one that's moderately significant, one that's fairly light. And they all three got resolved today, in this early part of it. As Mercury goes retrograde, it's going to be exactly squaring my Mercury in Capricorn, my Mercury Venus. So it's like, but it's interesting. I think as
Mercury's in the
long,
zone, it's in the shadow zone. So this
totally.
is, yeah.
Yeah. So but what's nice about it is like, and then there's, when I was involved with that astrological organization a few years ago that I ended up leaving, I resigned during Mercury retrograde in Scorpio. And they were like, oh, well, you don't mean this because it's Mercury retrograde and you're going to change your mind. And, I changed my mind to appease them, but I still ended up leaving the organization. So it's like this interesting thing, I think, where we can I don't know, it's like, I have this image of like a bag that's like filled up with all these things that are kind of half done. And then all of a sudden, or no, it's like a conveyor belt. Maybe that's more of a sense. And it's like, it hits the conveyor belt and then it's finally done and it hits the bag and it's like, okay, that's resolved. And now we can move on.
Yeah. I've seen different things happen. Like, obviously there's certain transactions that have to occur in people's lives during Mercury retrograde. And basically, it doesn't say that it's going to go bad. It may be that you have to revisit it at a later time. But as you said in your situation with this organization, the same result happened. It just, and I had a similar situation where, a transaction happened, but then it had to be reinforced a couple years later. And so there's, those kinds of things. It isn't like everything's necessarily going to go wrong.
Right.
But part of, I think the real important thing about following these planetary energies is really being in alignment with what your soul is telling you. Is this really right for me to be doing at this time?
Right. And that
Uh,
whatever it is you enter into is like, I know like for one thing that my big thing is like an agreement that I'm in the process that, well, actually it is finally concluded. But what's nice about agreements is as long as you have that clause in that allows you to amend it and to come back and renegotiate different aspects that don't appear to be working. And I think that's one thing that's really so beautiful and so important about Mercury retrograde, and especially Mercury retrograde in an air sign, and even more importantly with Libra. This is a great time to kind of review your social contracts with other individuals, right? How, is it a fairly even relationship? I mean, it's funny, we think of this idea of like, oh, relationships have to be this 50-50 situation. There's really no such thing as a 50-50 relationship. What it is like, it's a 20-80, it's a 60-40, it's a 70-30, and those go back and forth between each side, however we do things. And sometimes some of us are a little bit apathetic about a relationship with a friend or a person. Sometimes they're apathetic with us. Maybe sometimes the energy is even more clear. You don't really even want to have anything to do with the person. But, are they seeing you? Are they able to hear you? I mean, like just what you went through with that litmus test, some people might say, hey, the truth is every time I encounter that individual, there's really no room for me. They're not asking any questions about what's going on in my life. And then you go like, wow, you know what? Maybe this isn't a relationship I want to continue any longer.
there's another part too, and you talk about in relationships with the Mercury retrograde thing. Um, Sometimes what another person is giving you, whether it's their conversation or something, something in the relationship, that what you give back is your personal response to what they gave you, which could include it
Mm.
could include a bunch of irritation and anger, or it could include a level of gratitude that is humongous. So, this whole, I mean, we're in a culture that is like, people, you pay people for this service and that commodity at that. And so sometimes in our relationships, people have done things for us. And, I mean, sometimes you repay, somebody does, some cleaning up for you or whatever, and you might reward them with a meal instead of money, or and some of that has to do with your own spirit, your own soul, and your relationship with that person. So I think we get caught up too much in this materialistic world that equates, well, that kind of, I have to pay somebody to do this task, and I have to pay them $20 an hour to do this. So should I give this person $20 over here? Or, and that I think really messes up a sense of relationship, where people start to not understand a certain reciprocity that is going on.
Yeah, it's funny because what I hear with that is like, Saturn trining from over in Aquarius right now in the retrograde phase as well. And, making sure that, that it's not necessarily tit for tat. And also the other thing that I've realized over the years, and, here I'm a Jupiter ruled individual with Sag rising. And what I realized that the real interesting thing about generosity is, while you might show generosity to someone, maybe that individual isn't the one that shows that back to you, but maybe another person in your life is a person that does that. It's like, it's almost, I think we have to like learn to like pay it forward in a way that isn't necessarily attached to the individual sometimes. Like, it's like if you're there and someone is in need, and especially, to be honest, when someone asks you for help, I think that takes a lot of courage. I think a lot of us need to learn. I know personally, like I'm learning a lot about having to ask for help. It's one of my big life lessons, because I'm so response able, with all that Virgo energy. So it's like learning to ask for help, learning and it being okay when someone says no, that they aren't able to, but also like acknowledging the courage and strength it takes for someone to ask for help. Because I think in our society, we're so raised to believe like, that we're just like this pillar of independence. And it's like, it's such BS. because there's not, we would, none of us would survive. Well, very few of us would survive if it was just ourselves. I mean, Navy SEALs, some Boy Scouts, made Eagle Scout, whatever it is, this ultimate camping people or whatever it is, go out there and do the wild thing, but out in the wild, the wild thing. But just, where they can really do. Otherwise, most of us, have to depend on, all these individuals to make our life possible, whether it's contractors, whether it's people at the grocery store, all those different services that are provided in life. So learning to, to be more responsible with that and to work with that. And I think the other thing is that Jupiter Venus for me that's coming into sense is like, how do we also give gratitude? There are so many people who haven't been working, and there are a lot of people who have been working this whole time. And, remember to give thanks. Remember, especially if you're in an opportunity where there's a place to tip a little more than usual, because wherever they are, I'm sure they've been doing a lot more than a lot of other people have been doing.
Yeah, these times are definitely ripe for showing a certain level of gratitude in many situations. Well, Michael, this is an interesting mercurial hop around.
I know I enjoy these kind of talks, but I know you tend to like a little bit more form. So thank you for wandering on the path with me today. How can people reach you?
Moonwiseastrology.com. Moonwiseastrology.com. You can, on Moonwise, you can get my email address and phone number, and you can also go to podcasts that are at ksfr.org. Yeah. How about you, Michael?
Me, best way to find me is at CoreMichael, CoreMichael.com. Got an upcoming talk in a couple of weeks on my new book, Astrological Mavericks, and then a workshop at the end of the month. If you have a planet on one of your angles, I really highly recommend it, and it's free through Kepler College. So just go to my website and check on upcoming talks, and you can find it there. It's always a treat to talk with you, Merrylin. Blessings to you during this Mercury retrograde period. May your relationships shine.
Well, thank you, and back at you. Bye for now.
Bye.